name is Anna Lane, and I am the co-lead for the Pacific Division feeding group that actually meets with the regional feeding leads. I'm also the feeding lead for NCCR. Mary? You're on mute.
Of course, I muted myself. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Prather. I am the co-lead with Anna, and I'm also the Gold Country Region regional feeding lead.
And I'm Deborah Smith, and I'm the Mass Care Regional lead for California Gold Country.
I will be driving the slides, and as you can see, this is a meal. So we're going to start. We'll be going pretty quickly, but again, this is kind of a review, etc. And we'll start off. Second. Right, I'm sharing. Okay, back to sharing. Okay. We're not going to go over the table of contents, but it is there. Okay, go ahead, Deborah.
Okay, so why this workshop in going on in that one of the things that happens a lot right now in talking is that feeding really has become a large responsibility in our shelters of shelter workers. And so we really wanted the opportunity of being able to go through that. We do know that, you know, feeding in the first 24 to 36 hours is pretty well mostly all on the shelter staff. And then, you know, what we need to know also in ongoing feeding relations ingoing, that's something that we want to be able to cover. So we're going to talk about the beginning of the sheltering team's responsibilities and then review the feeding operations in congregate shelters. Next slide. So I think we've probably, most all of us who've ever been in sheltering before, or has probably seen this example of a timeline for from DAT to a DRO. But once the shelter team sets up the initial operation and the shelter gets going, you know, they are responsible of starting the snack table and getting that underway. My personal advice is start your coffee first. And then in addition, there may be times that you're also being the one who's called on to arrange for the first meal, which should be served in about 4 hours from the time that you first set up. And then afterwards, really at that point, it's going to be DR specific as far as whether there's a feeding personnel or not that's in there. So just next slide.
Okay. So I'm going to go over just some very summary level information about how the feeding is provided in the shelter. And of course, it'll vary depending on the size of your shelter. If you have a large congregate shelter, and as you know, we went to congregate shelters last year, and we will probably continue with congregate for the year 2022. But in that, when we have a large population, there is going to be a feeding team and feeding partner, we believe, if we can get that for you. So you will have that support. But if you're in a medium-sized shelter, very likely you may not have a feeding team present on site, in which case the sheltering team carries some of that load in getting the meals to the clients. And when you have a small shelter, you will not have a feeding team present, nor will you have a feeding partner on site. Our feeding partners will not provide those meals if the count is under 30. So in that case, we have to provide the meals from restaurants or other sources. Our common feeding partners, as you all know, are the Salvation Army, Southern Baptist, World Central Kitchen. Off the grid we used, and Mercy Chefs. We used actually all 5 of these last year in the Gold Country fires. But what you'll see as a difference is Salvation Army and Southern Baptist will do 3 meals a day. And often the breakfast it'll be cold or it might even be hot. But World Central Kitchen, they do a lot of their meals from the restaurants. If it's a large operation, they might open up a kitchen, but they do lunch and dinner only. Off the grid is from restaurants and it's lunch and dinner only. Then Mercy Chefs was 3 meals a day. Just for your information on how the workflow happens, the feeding partners are activated and managed by the DRO headquarters feeding lead, and the feeding lead determines which partner is going to be providing the food at which shelters. And a lot of that is also determined by how long they're willing to stay, etc. Most of them are deployed for 2 weeks, so the feeding lead then has to identify a replacement and try to get in a transition plan so that it's very smooth. And in the case where the feeding partner does not provide 3 meals a day, then the Red Cross will need to provide the breakfast, like a cold, shelf-stable breakfast. One of the things that we want to make sure happens continually and that it's clear communications and happens well is this communication of the feeding partner back and forth daily, maybe even a couple times a day with the headquarters feeding lead, and who is responsible for all the paperwork and the documentation and the direction and providing the orders to the feeding partner, but also the shelter or the feeding point of contact at the shelter. It could be the manager or a different person as the point in contact, and where we have the communication of your forecasted of orders, daily counts, special dietary requirements, etc. And that all goes back into headquarters. But there also ideally is a touch base every day between the shelter and the feeding partner where information can be shared. Like, if we find that a particular person is having a hard time chewing the food, it can be communicated. I mean, that way we can better serve the clients, and the feeding partner does not feel like they're left out of the information stream, because one of the things that we found out by having a focus group or a panel discussion with our primary feeding partners as an exercise in the Pacific Division is they feel isolated and they don't have access to the information they need to do the best job they possibly can. Plus, they want to connect with the people at the shelter. So make sure that you, keep them looped in. And this is this particular slide carries the information that we learned from having that discussion with our feeding partners, that make sure that you look at where the layout is that will work well with them, because they can actually help you with the distribution of food, and get to know your feeding partner. I mean, they want to work with you and be treated as a partner in the disaster. Their teams are volunteers, and they benefit from the appreciation. Communicate important details. Let them know if you have certain wristbands that mean something in particular, so that they can understand how you want to work with your clientele, etc. And then the daily check-in was a point that Patrick, who leads the disaster teams for the Salvation Army, he mentioned this would be really, really important and very, very useful. Food and personal safety. Okay, here's the 4-4-4, or forget it, the rule of 4. And this is the food has to be held between 40 and 140 degrees for no more than 4 hours. So you really want to quickly chill your food or keep it hot. And this middle temperature between 40 and 140 degrees, the bacteria can double in quantity. So that's really critical to monitor food temperatures and make sure that you chill the food as quickly as you can. If you don't have a food thermometer, you can request one using a 6409 and make sure you have one at each shelter at least. When the food is opened and closed frequently, etc., it's got to be checked more often. And you want to document the time, the date, and the temperature on a visible label like blue tape, and then update it if it's moved to another site or refrigerator. So, and then if we know that clients are at work and then they come maybe an hour later, just put those meals directly into refrigeration if you can. We want to adhere to the Red Cross guidelines, and there's something wrong with this picture. It looks like a nice guy with a mask on, you know, and he's putting the food into the bag, but he's not wearing a hairnet and he's not wearing gloves. So make sure you adhere to the requirements of gloves and hairnet or a hat. We're still using the set down and step back method. This is a configuration that Mary came up with. If you put two tables together, theoretically, you can have clients on one side and then, you know, your distribution of food on the other side. We may hear from our leadership that, you know, they will pull back on some of the COVID guidelines, but right now we haven't heard that yet. And then you've got to walk through frequently and sanitize common surface areas, etc. Just as a note, the Salvation Army last year in their feeding for the Gold Country wildfires was delivering the foods in IPMs, and the food distribution to the client was handled mainly by internally at the shelter. But one of the things that they would like to test out is to bring in plexiglass barriers, and then they can then move the food from wherever they prepared it in larger containers and dish it out at the shelter. This would enable them to have better temperature control, you know, keep things hotter and or colder. And the other thing that they would benefit from indirectly is their people miss having connection with the client. So they can provide more manpower to help out in that case. And all the Salvation Army or Southern Baptist, Mercy Chefs, etc., all of their volunteers are ServSafe qualified. So they are very aware of food handling procedures. So this plexiglass barrier change is what they're using, like in Louisiana, etc., and they will likely want to test it in this upcoming fire season. So keeping everyone safe and healthy, the single most important activity is hand washing to keep you safe. Anyone helping with food must wash their hands with soap and hot water before putting on gloves. Now, this is something that is really important because if you work with EBVs or other people and say, you know, you got to put gloves on before you handle food, they'll put the gloves on without going and washing their hands first. So that's really important to let them know to do that. And then the amount of time that you have to be scrubbing your hands is you sing happy birthday to yourself twice. And then use antibacterial soap, no bar soap. And actually I had a conversation today with Mary and I thought, well, why? And it's because things can sit and grow on bar soap. So ideally you use the little containers. And then more health and safety information. Clients need to be reminded to wash their hands. The other thing we often do is we give out pumps of sanitation in line. Have here you go, feed with a volunteer at the front with hand sanitizer. And remember that hand sanitizer does not kill norovirus. So we kind of forgotten about norovirus with all the COVID stuff, but it's still there. So we have to be cognizant of it. This is important. It's not all disinfectants are equal, and dwell time is an important consideration. This stuff has to sit on a surface for it to really work. So these are the common sanitation products, but they don't kill norovirus. They do kill COVID and flu, but these on the right-hand side will actually kill norovirus. So it's recommended that you have at least one thing around that is strong enough to kill norovirus. And then the dwell time ranges from 30 seconds to 10 minutes to be effective. So, you know, you read your directions and wear a mask and gloves when you're using these products. Okay, good. And this is Mary.
Thank you. Next slide, Anna. So if you're purchasing meals, if you're the first 24 to 48 hours in the shelter, here's a couple of things just to keep in mind. First of all, we try to aim for some type of budget. $25 a day per person is pretty good. We do know prices are going up significantly. That might have to trend upward as well, so keep that in mind. You will be purchasing meals from local restaurants or grocery stores. I tend to use grocery stores right off the bat because I think they're very effective in terms of having, especially if they have delis, they can do sandwiches for your lunches. They can do dinners. They usually have some kind of chicken with a lot of different deli salads for your dinners. And at the same time, if you have to, you're doing cold breakfasts, you can pick those up at the grocery store. So that's something to keep in mind. Pick up and distribute. It's always good to be there a little bit early because sometimes the vendor that you have asked to provide the meals may be a little behind schedule. So when you show up, they kind of hurry up and get going. And be sure, you know, it's really important to wash your hands, wear your gloves, make sure when you're bringing the meals out to your car that you're able to unlock your car or your vehicle and not set the meals down on the ground. Now, I see here we have some language that we are changing, but I've noticed it's come up a couple of times in the slides, and I just want to point it out to you. It talks about keeping special meals separated. We're trying to eliminate the term special meals and really go to dietary restrictions and accommodations. So the dietary restricted meals, if you will, should be separated if they can. It's awesome if you can get your food provider to write the name of the person on the box. And then that way, you know, it's separate, you know who it belongs to, and there's no issue. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Didn't know if you heard me.
No, yeah, it's looking for the arrow.
So this is something you guys can take the time to read at your leisure. You know, you're going to try and identify, for those of you that are standing up a shelter and are going to be doing the feeding the first 24 to 48 hours, what are your local restaurants? And this is, in Blue Skies, this is a perfect opportunity for all of our shelter SAs to get involved other than when we're in a disaster and in the shelter. Work with your DPMs to make a list of the vendors that are in your area, go out and talk to them. You know, are they able to provide 25, 30 meals, 50 meals? You know, how much lead time do they need to do that? Are they only open breakfast or lunch? But have those conversations now in Blue Skies so that when the disaster hits and you are responsible for getting those meals, you know right where to go. A couple of examples are there at the bottom. I just want to say one of the things we are focusing on in our particular division, which I'm encouraging other regions to do, is to look at healthier meals. Comfort food does not necessarily have to be unhealthy, but we have to look at a balance of what we're serving our clients. Can I get the next slide, Anna? I think it shows it maybe. Well, not quite yet. So again, we're changing the language here, and it's dietary restrictions. This is for your reference. I have some other references that we can share, but we're talking about the 4 or 5 or 6 most common allergens, or the 4 or 5 or 6 most common medical conditions that require dietary restrictions. And we're talking about the 5 or 6 common cultural or religious diet restrictions. So as we change our thinking and our language about how we're doing the feeding, I just want people to keep in mind that when we say special diets, everyone wants to be special. I certainly want to be special, and I want a special diet. But I think for the sake of our feeding partners and our clients, and even the volunteer staff, the Red Cross staff, if we can come up with vocabulary that helps people understand that this is for medical reasons, not just for, gee, I really want to do this. It sounds fun. Next slide, please. So here's an example of what we were talking about. And I can tell you, we struggle to do this all the time. But if you look at your little pie chart, you should be having a quarter of your meal should be protein, a quarter some type of starch, and half vegetables. Tough to do, I know, but we're making an effort to do that, to look at more nutritionally balanced meals. Even smaller meals, a lot of times if you're using a local provider like Black Bear Diner or Mimi's Cafe, they have huge portions. Look for smaller plates, smaller portions, senior sizes. They really are what's best for our client. When you're selecting those meals, think of all the client cultural needs, the allergies, dietary restrictions. There's a very good chance a vegan or vegetarian meal will fit for almost all of them. So it's often good to consider putting a couple extra vegetarian meals in, which give you some flexibility. If you're going to be paying, you will be paying with your MCPC or P card, preferably P card, but oops, what happened to the bottom of the slide? Anna, we lost it. It's most important to immediately take a copy of that receipt with your camera, if you can, with your phone. So you take a picture of it right away so you don't lose it. Hopefully when you get back to the shelter, there's a large envelope you can put all the receipts in, because those will need to get forwarded to headquarters if the disaster then expands and becomes a higher level disaster. And I'm refreshing my mind. I can't read the bottom. Anna, there's something on the bottom. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Am I the one that's lost?
No. Anna, I think we're going to move forward, so we need to go to the next slide. Okay, this is where we're taking over for sheltering or doing meals in the congregate sheltering. So I'm going to take over from here in that. Just sort of some obvious things. We talk about publicizing our meal times because it's best. Clients like to know when the meals are. In addition, you should be able to find in your shelter trailer or where you're going in your signage kit, there is the signs that state and have it set up where you can publicize the meal times. It's important to do. It's a question you'll be asked 50 million times a day if we don't do that. In going through. Currently, right now, and we'll talk a little bit more on snacks, we're not being able, or not asking people to have to keep snacks 24/7 because at this time we still need to not have that snack table self-serve and to go through. If it is possible to post a sign as far as what's being served, especially if you're going to have a long line, if in a larger shelter. It definitely stops the, I waited in line and oh my goodness, we're having meatloaf and I can't stand meatloaf conversation, having, being up there at the very beginning of the line. Other than that, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so a little bit on the snack tables. It really is important to get that snack table set up as soon as possible. When you first start out, people, when they're coming in on the disaster, are may have not eaten for quite a while, especially if this is a disaster happening in between meal times. It's also going to take time to get everything settled down, to get that first meal served. So the snack table becomes really important to have. So make sure that that gets upset right away. Make sure in this things, hopefully, that the clients are able to see what their choices are in the snack table. Because as we said, right now, currently under COVID, we're not doing self-serve for snacks. It is a situation of they ask for the snack, we set it down on the table, they pick up the snack, and it goes from there. We remained gloved and masked the whole time in there. So we suggest in this one is that you post some signage around the snack table that sort of says, wait to be served, please don't self-serve, something along in that line, just to let people know that they need to ask for what's going on in through. I'm going to bring up again my do not put water bottles. I know we deal with the heat a lot for wildfires, into a cooler with ice and then allow people to reach in and grab them. I learned that lesson the really hard way, that ice in a cooler does not stop the transmission of neurovirus. So trust me, you do not want that going through your shelter. Make sure that you're counting your beverages and your snacks together on that. So a cup of coffee is a snack. Water, if it's not being served with a meal, is a snack. And so, each one of those gets counted as an individual snack. What you're going to look at is, as far as going, is sort of an average that's used of about 6 snacks per person per day in your shelter. And keep that in mind if you're trying to look at what your ordering is. Once the shelter is established and you're doing a regular snack count, it's pretty easy to see what you're using and what you're not using. So one of the suggestions that we have for a lot of people is that when you're setting up your snack table, count what it is that you first put out in that way. And then at the end, just count what's left, and therefore you can know how much that was taken and put in. It's a little bit easier than keeping little tabs while you're handing out snacks in them. Want to be sure to know that after you've set up the snack table and have your snacks for the beginning of the shelter, from then on in, you should be receiving, hopefully, your snacks through logistics, and to be able to order at that time. And I saw someone in that one, sweet and salty, is you don't have to get specific in ordering your snacks to say, I need 7 granola bars and 5 bags of chip. You can, as you said, put sweet and salty in, and they'll put together a mix for you that goes through. Number 2, on snack tables, one other thing is that fruit has to be something with a peel that can be peeled off. So no grapes, no strawberries, nothing that is just picked up and eaten without having to peel it. Next slide.
Deb, I'm going to stop you real quick. We do have several questions in the chat. I thought it's time for us to address several of them.
Absolutely.
Right. We have, Labette said, two of the largest issues that we have, it's one is meals and snacks are largely inappropriate for diabetics, and also is too much sodium in the restaurant or deli food. Do we have any suggestions what to do? And along the same line, Jean Roski asked, can we provide shakers of potassium chloride as a salt substitute?
I can take some of that to start with.
You want to start that, Mary? Okay.
You can purchase potassium chloride packets, like you have the little salt packets. I wouldn't recommend a shaker at this point unless you have enough staff that a staff person is going to, with gloves, handle the shaker and put it on the person's meal. Right now, still with COVID, we're not having different people handling the same item. So a shaker at this point, I wouldn't recommend, but if you're certainly having an issue, if you have lots of diabetics, the potassium chloride packets would be fine to have on hand. In terms of the diabetics, my best suggestion is, we all know diabetics need low or no sugar, low carbohydrates, which turn into sugar. So we're really looking at proteins and whole grains, not processed grains. So things like, and certainly fruits and vegetables. I mean, salads. Last summer, I did quite a few salads, including Cobb salads, for some of our diabetics in the shelter, and they loved it. So what I would suggest, always ask the person, if I tell you I'm diabetic, I can tell you the kinds of things I can eat. Now, keep in mind that we have pretty much some standard vegetarian, vegan, diabetic meals that our partners are providing us. So if you end up with a very, very special diet, nope, wrong word, a very restricted diet, that's going to fall to the shelter manager for their approval, and then you're going to have someone from the shelter go get that, because our feeding provider is not going to be able to provide that specificity of a particular meal. So, I mean, other than the vegan and the vegetarian for the diabetics with extra protein, that's my best suggestion. Does anyone else have a suggestion?
No, I do know that if you have someone with ingoing, we can put down low sodium as a dietary restriction if there is a medical situation going on with that. So I would also remember that that's another thing to look at. I wish truly there were a better answer as far as what our restaurants and other areas do for feeding. But short of home cooked meals, we are sort of bound through what's available from our partners and from what's available from restaurants.
And let me just say, there's some excellent suggestions in the chat.
Yep.
I didn't label all of them. The hard-boiled eggs, the string cheese. Yes, diabetics do, especially the type of diabetes you have, need to snack throughout the day to keep their blood sugars level. That's why we encourage them to, when the snack table is opened at certain times, take 3 or 4. Don't just take one. Take what you need for the day. I mean, usually the snack table will be open 2 or 3 times a day, maybe even more if you have enough staff, but certainly encourage them to take what they need. Apples, I mean, I'm looking at the list right now and people have excellent suggestions. I encourage you to read through that.
This is Anna. So in one of the instances where the meal was going to be salad with pizza, for the diabetic, we actually had them, the restaurant do meatballs, and then they had like one slice of garlic bread rather than the pizza. So you can accommodate, or certain places can also accommodate if they know in advance that this is what's needed.
Okay, we'll do one more question and then we'll continue. So the question is, Michael asked, if someone refuses to obey the sign, even after it's been pointed out and explained, what do we do?
My basic advice is that if you manage to keep a table between the snacks and the clients would have to come around the table to get the snacks. And you're less likely to have that problem in the shelter.
Okay, thank you. Continue, please.
Okay. It's a nice break, guys, on that one. So, oops, we lost the slides there, Anna.
There you go.
Okay.
Do you see it, Deb?
Yep, there it is for me. Okay, so we're just a little bit of notes on the coffee. We all know that is an extremely important part of a shelter. It is the coffee, and people, as anyone who's, you know, a hero of working night shift knows, if you don't have that coffee ready in the morning, you are not going to have a happy shelter. So, you know, remember about the fact that it takes time for a large coffee pot to brew. So the average on that is about a minute per cup. So you want to be sure to start with the idea that it's going to take you maybe up to 45 minutes before you have a fully brewed pot of coffee if you're filling it one up with a 42 to 40, you know, cup container. So, and then remember too to keep hopefully the other container full of hot water for those tea drinkers. And also it's good in the morning for instant oatmeal packets to have in that way. So you want to be able to have that going as much as you can. The breakfast orders on that, it's the same idea as with the snack table, is that it's, you know, the breakfast is set out. People point to what they want, and then we do the step put out and step back method to give them what it is that they want for their breakfast. If it's yogurt or a piece of fruit or an oatmeal or a muffin, depending on what they want, then we give them that. And so next slide.
A quick question.
Yeah.
For us non-coffee drinkers, how do you suggest we make the coffee? How much water, and how many cups?
Ooh, I'm going to defer to that because I usually go with at least a teaspoon a cup. Mary, how much are you putting in?
When percolating a large pot like that, you need 2 heaping tablespoons per cup.
Okay, she puts more coffee in and hers probably tastes better than mine.
Thank you.
But no, that's a very good point. And I think we probably should put a little information, laminated sheet of paper in the feeding box. That's a very, very good question. Thank you. That reminds me, not everyone drinks coffee, so we will take care of that.
This is actually the recipe that was in the pot that I took a picture of right here.
All right, so we can move forward, and I think your feeding team has heard that we need to get instructions out on how to make a cup of coffee better for people. And unfortunately, it's not go to Starbucks. So going forward, as far as for feeding an indoor population that we have in the shelters, as we had said before, you know, making sure that we post in there. I want to be sure to know that you're posting your signage in the prominent, you know, the languages that are spoken in your shelter. So, you know, does it need to be in both Spanish and English? That, you know, the question is yes, probably. You know, when we had a large Hmong population up in Siskiyou County, we needed to look at having signage in their language. Make sure that we are supporting those healthy habits, being able to do the hand sanitizer, do things that are being able to encourage hand washing procedures and going through. try to look if you've got a really large shelter of maybe staggering your meal times. One suggestion that I heard of is everyone kind of becomes Southwest Airlines. So, you know, group A boards and then group B boards, and you sort of do it that way. It avoids having a line of 50 people waiting to come through at one time. It's in that one. And then, as we had said, dietary, the restricted meals. For that, try to, you know, look at seeing what you can do to get them labeled. What you don't want to put on the meal is Mary Smith diabetic. You either, you know, keep it to Mary S, or some, you know, clue as far as right. But we really don't want to be handing out a deal which points out the meal and the client's full name. That's part of our confidentiality in through. And then meal times is a great time to use your EBVs. You know, that's something that easily for people who are volunteering to be able to help do a meal serving line, if we go back into serving lines, or to help hand out food. So remember that it's, yeah, I'm sorry, event-based volunteers, remember them when you're setting up your feeding lines. So next slide. Yeah. So outdoor shelter populations, we saw a lot last year, and it seems to be continuing in a trend that the outside population is getting to be so often even larger than the inside population. And a lot of those people we are serving food to. They're handling and keeping most of all the rest of the services that are held within the shelter. However, they're not sleeping inside the shelter. So we want to be sure that we're following all the guidance for inside shelter. With the outside population, we advise, you know, posting the meal times outside also so they can see when they are. You know, making sure, of course, that, you know, the feeding group, your EBVs and that, understand if you've got using, for example, blue wristbands for outside and yellow wristbands for inside, that people working on the service line know that, to know as far as that they're feeding everybody in there. And then we found last year to be really helpful to try to set up one feeding area, not only for delivery and that, but it also just helped make people all feel together. Meal times are a real social event. And so, you know, the more we can do to sort of help our clients feel together as a population, the better. So let's, you know, we try not to segregate people too much in the meal times. Next slide. And then we got to count. We got to count everything and make sure those meal counts and those snack counts have to be into the headquarter feeding lead by 2 p.m. That's necessary for them to be able to put forth what's going to go on for the next day's meals, and also to meet the reporting responsibilities that are put out there for our budgeting. So there's a lot of reasons, but 2 p.m. is the deadline time. So when you're sending in that time, when you're counting it, to remember you're counting a time period that goes last night's dinner, this morning's breakfast, this morning's lunch, turning it in at 2 o'clock. So you're not guessing how much people you're going to serve for your dinner. You're telling how many people you served last night in that. Try to, you know, look if you can, and they said, making sure that your snack table has been ordered out through logistics, and let them know how much is being used, because that count also has to go into the national count. Next slide. And I think that comes back to you, Mary.
Yes, I guess it does. So, and we're kind of running short on time, and I want to allow enough time for questions and to get through all the questions. So let me just say, first of all, we can do food donations from restaurants or organizations that have commercial kitchens. Unfortunately, we cannot take donations from individuals. So the woman that comes to the shelter and she's baked 100 chocolate chip cookies for you, while that's absolutely wonderful and so thoughtful of her, we can't use those. So my best suggestion is to explain to her that unfortunately we can't do that, but that the church down the street might be able to distribute it, or if the firefighters are staying close by, possibly then. In terms of donations from restaurants, that's perfectly okay as long as it's scheduled and planned for. Let me give you an example. In the salt fire up in Shasta, one of the little local taquerias wanted to donate one of the meals. All we had to do was connect with our feeding provider, our partner, and tell them that we wouldn't need meals on the following Wednesday. So it's terrible when we don't communicate that information and we end up with meals donated by a local restaurant who wants to help out, as well as meals that we've paid for from our feeding partner. So that's really something really important to give some thought to. And right now, in Blue Skies, great opportunity as you're talking to your local food vendors, your restaurants, your delis, all of those, is to ask them, would they be interested in donating a meal for 30 people one time? Many of them want to participate and they don't know how. So just something to keep in mind. Next slide. Is this me, Anna? I guess so. So again, you will have access to this slide deck. Please feel free to use it in your territory with whatever teams you feel are appropriate. We're really trying to partner very closely with our sheltering people, feeding and sheltering together. We know you can't do one without the other. We can't feed anyone if we don't have shelters, and shelters need feeders. So we just really think this is important to be working on this collaboratively and together. Remember, feeding is very expensive. It's a huge part of the cost of the DRO. So we want to make sure that we have healthy food delivered in a safe manner and everybody is happy in the shelter. Next slide.
There isn't one, Mary, but this part is important right here.
Oh, you want me to promote my own training?
Yeah.
Okay, so May 10th, we will have a session on the mass care procurement card and how to use it and how it works and how to get one and the documentation you need. It will be a fun-filled presentation. I'm done, Anna.
Okay, so then that's it.
Our
Thank you
contact
very
information.
much.
Okay, so any questions?
Yes, I am going to open the floor up for all the questions. But before we jump into questions, I just wanted to remind everyone that our next session is going to be next Tuesday, April the 12th. Same day, same time, same channel. We're going to talk about how to set up and organize a shelter and how to triage, what's the triage process. Okay, so let me go ahead and open up to the whole floor to see if we have any questions. I saw someone earlier, one of the question is, we mentioned wristband. Is it required for us to use wristband?
No, it's wristbands are something that are used in several shelters. I know we use them a bit up here in Gold Country, usually to identify 3 different groups, which is inside shelter, outside shelter, and isolation people. Luckily, hopefully we don't have many people who are running around having to wear an isolation wristband. So.
Great. So anyone now can come off mute. I didn't unmute you all. I give you the option for unmute yourself. You want to raise your hand or jump off mute. And Tina mentioned, Tina is going to be our presenter for next week. She said, make sure to bring a pen and a pencil with you for the next presentation. And we have lots of thank yous in the chat. Do we have any questions that anyone wants to come off mute? Jeffrey, go ahead. Jeffrey, you had your hands raised? Okay, we'll go to Michael first then. Michael Hernandez.
Good evening. Thank you. Just a real quick question. I've never seen it written anywhere. With typical 12-hour shifts, what is the responsibility for feeding night shift?
This is Anna. One of the things I've heard is to make sure to have a set aside for the night shift.
I didn't. Anna, could you repeat that? You broke up.
Oh, sorry. One of the things I've heard is when you order the meals to make sure and have something saved for the night shift, because it's kind of hard for them to be able to get something at that time. So we try to do that. It's, you know, of course they have a mission card, but still try to do it.
Yeah, it's something we suggest strongly, that when you're serving out your meals, to be sure to put those meals away right away for the night shift. Having worked many, many night shifts myself, not having something, and it's nearly impossible to go out and get anything, or have anything open during those hours. So make sure that those arrangements are being made with the day staff, and that is happening. And I don't think, Michael, that there is any specific sheltering doctrine regarding that.
And plus, if you put meals into the refrigerator for the night shift, label it with the date and the time, etc., because otherwise they will have no idea, you know, what is the most, what is fresh.
Thank you. Jeffrey Jacobs, you're next. Jeffrey, if you're speaking, we can hear you. Okay, Jeffrey, if you can type your question in the chat, we'll go to Robin. Robin.
Okay, can I, as a feeding lead in Los Angeles, can I reiterate something you said about receipts and how absolutely important it is to get the receipts back to, any receipts for food, back to your feeding lead? Because not only do I have paperwork I have to do, but I have to get them back to whoever's P card is being used so they can do their stuff with the bank. And if we don't have P cards, there's forms you have to fill out and it gets to be messy.
I absolutely agree, Robin. Thank you for reiterating that. It is extremely critical in feeding to get that receipt right away, within 24 hours. If you can't do it via your phone camera, when you pick up the food. Thank you for bringing that back up.
Can I also make a comment about midnight meals?
Absolutely.
Remember, if you're on night shift, lunch is at 12 midnight, and you really want, as a good feeding lead, provide food and not have your volunteers running around town looking for food at midnight.
Yeah.
The safety effects of, running around is very dangerous.
That's very true. And let me just say, and it's okay if you want to save a meal in the refrigerator from the client meals. There is nothing that prohibits a person, a staff member that's working in the night shift, getting a meal that they like, that they want on their mission card, and bringing it with them and putting it in the refrigerator so they can reheat it at a time that's appropriate for them. You know, the mission card is for you, for your meals. You know, you can do what you want to with it. I certainly understand the need to put meals back that we've had, but I want to caution people about constantly putting meals in the refrigerator, leftover meals in the refrigerator. That is not a good idea. You know, even if you're marking the day and the time and the temperature and all of that, it's just not a good idea. We're not in the business of serving leftover meals. So I want to caution people about the constantly, you know, one day and then it needs to go out.
Before we close, can I just point your attention to this last slide that was in the appendix? These are some common things that you would use in feeding and an identification of whether or not we expect them to be on the trailer or if you need to order them using 6409, kind of general stuff.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out several differences. P card stands for purchasing card. Purchasing card is a card, it's like a credit card that you have to submit an application for with the regional leadership's approval, the regional disaster officer's approval to get that. Usually all the paid staff have that and the regional leadership have that. Mission card is a card that you get when you get deployed. It's also like a credit card or debit card that has a set amount of money that you can use for your travel expenses or your personal food expenses. An MCPC card, the master procurement card, is usually given to a supervisor when you assign for a supervisor in a deployment, that you can use that to get emergency supplies when you don't have logistics or you don't have an order. So you can use that to, you know, get some supplies for the shelter, or you can use that for food. Usually, I believe the starting limit for MCPC card, the master procurement card, is starts at 500. So that's the difference between three cards. And I do see one of the comment here says, if a disaster action team opens up an emergency shelter and we don't have the purchasing card, do we contact the regional leadership for that? Mary, you want to take that?
Sure. That would be correct. The mass care chief, the director of operations, any of the leadership could provide that MCPC card. It's actually, this is going to get a little confusing, but it's actually the same physical card. It just has a different designation on the back end. So instead of being a mission card that has, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, $250 for a 2-week deployment or something like that, it would have a $500 amount to it, like you said. But yeah, contact the regional leadership right away, especially if you, as a DAT member, are going to be setting up or opening up a shelter, and you know you're going to be feeding right away within the 4 hours. Does that help or confuse you?
Thank you.
I think what we can kind of say on that one, if you're the DAT team and you're having to end up setting up a shelter right away that goes through, and so you really do need through your dispatch on your duty officer, hopefully we'll have information as to who has a P card. Your disaster program manager, your DPM should definitely have one. And to work at that point with them to be able to handle the feeding needs. You're also going to probably need one to come up, you know, as far as some other supplies that are going. So it's something that if you're the DAT lead, find out who has that card ahead of time.
And Hillary has a great suggestion. If it is a DAT, thank you, Hillary, for posting that. You know, call your DPM and use their P card